If you aim to get 10 and you get 10, well, now can you get 12? And it's like...
Part of the Founder Lab, we want to go deep on individualized topics. And let's talk about kind of the executional phase.
You should never accept defeat. And even if you're winning, that's still defeat. And you should try to find a way to beat that winning. It's just very open, very adaptable. These are normally the people and or founders that are more successful than others because they...
Super interesting. Let's get specific with that. Here's the capital that I can place. Which one of those items is going to make you the biggest return for the least amount of either effort or money?
Yeah, maximum results, least effort, least capital, least risk.
If you want something done right, do it yourself. It couldn't be further from the reality because...
Belief is, confidence is something that will occur based on historical evidence, right? Faith is confidence is something that will occur regardless. What is the price that you pay for being a victim to your fear? If you are afraid to accept that that's true, don't expect to have extraordinary results.
So the last topic I want to cover is around go-to-market strategy.
Yeah. Because part of the issue, especially with marketing teams too, and especially with very creative marketing teams, is they don't...
Welcome to the Founders Lab. In this series, I want to get really deep with other founders and we want to talk specifics about business. One of the challenges I have when we're interviewing someone is we stay at the shallow level. But truly to be able to help and create value, I need to go deep on specific topics. So I'm getting the best of the best founders and we're going to get and share insights that are going to be able to help you in your business.
Yeah. So Toby, part of the Founder Lab, we want to go deep on individualized topics and ultimately have a back and forth around how can provide the best value for founders in these specific pieces.
Cool.
And so what I wanted to kind of start us off with today is around, let's talk about kind of the executional phase.
Yeah.
So when a business has found that product market fit, it's the early stages of scale, and we'll kind of go back and forth between the different types of sectors of businesses, whether it be tech, whether it be services, whether it be product, to help people get really specific.
Sure.
Because I think one of the reasons that this came up for me was, amazing having great interviews with people, but sometimes we kind of get to top level detail. But if I put myself in the shoes, I'm in year 2, year 3 of founding a business. I want to get to that granular level. Yeah. What can I take away?
Yep.
All right. So let's go.
Sure.
So let's talk about execution and the prioritization.
Yep.
So in the early stage of business, do you have any kind of frameworks you think about where am I going to deploy capital or time to go what's the right pathway to starting to jam?
Sure. So absolutely have some frameworks, and I'll also while we workshop and talk through this, maybe I'll drop in some resources too that other people can have a bit of a look at. So one resource that I think the ideas apply kind of to any business, but specifically in tech, it's going to be very useful. Is Growth Hacking by Sean Ellis. And he has a really interesting idea from a prioritization standpoint, which he has, there's variations of this now, but he initially kind of called it the ICE framework, which is, so ICE stands for impact, certainty and ease. And so what he would effectively do is, when looking at a list of opportunities, he'd say, well, which one's going to have the highest impact, that I'm the most certain are going to have that impact, that have the least effort or the highest degree of ease, and then basically based on that score, what kind of quantitatively gets that the highest score, and therefore we should focus on those things. Now, the frameworks are useful tools, but obviously that is entirely dependent on how good is your judgment of impact and certainty and forecasting effort. That's a good point. So there's a really important kind of acknowledgement there, and I think then what comes off the back of that, or was potentially implied with that, is that the earlier you are on in your journey, it's worth acknowledging a quite reliable assumption, that is that you probably don't actually have that good judgment across those dimensions. And so part of what you should be trying to do over time is, whilst using this as a way of kind of scoring what you're doing, then also having a feedback loop to actually reflect, well, I thought this was going to have high impact, did it or did it not? I had really high certainty about the impact, was that kind of founded or unfounded? And when I was initially forecasting the effort, did that actually turn out to be true?
Yes.
Because it's not just what you prioritize, it's then how you use the results from that prioritization to re-inform the next round of prioritization, which probably then links into maybe one of the closing loops here, which is that your prioritization should kind of be happening constantly.
Yep.
So a lot of people think that strategic planning or prioritization is about what we're going to do in the future.
Yep.
Which in some regards that's certainly a consideration. But prioritization is actually also a kind of perpetual evolution cycle that occurs. Every new piece of information you acquire, every new piece of work you do, should then be a new piece of data that informs the immediate next set of work that you do. So in other words, if you have a 6-month plan, if you do 2 months of that and you realize nothing is working, you shouldn't just continue with the remaining 4 months, right? So prioritization should kind of be perpetual in that regards.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know what I love there? It's really interesting. I thought I created that framework in my mind. And so it's good to know that I'm not unique again. And so like the way I describe that is like, it's almost like I sometimes think of myself as like a lazy man. And I go think about what is the pathway to least resistance?
Yeah, maximum results, least effort, least capital, least risk.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you think about like prioritizing and you go, okay, like what is the most important thing when you're scaling up a business? The reality is money.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, so like, okay, I have a series of things. I'm a business owner. I'm in the services space.
Yeah.
Here's the capital that I can place. Which one of those items is going to make you the biggest return for the least amount of either effort or money?
Yep.
And so if you can find, if you want to choose like, what do I need to use as like the right pathway?
Yep.
Think about that first.
Yeah.
And if you can have like the pathway of least resistance and like, that framework, which is like, what is the perceived outcome and the perceived amount of effort? The one add-on I add to that is the dependencies.
Yeah, well, what assumptions are you making that need to be true in order for this to happen, and what work needs to happen alongside this or before or after in order for it to work?
Bingo. Yes, and also like dependencies from like a people standpoint. So if you think about like, let's say you have a team of 4 or 5 in your business, and like in order to do this, let's now talk tech. In order to sell this new package we're going to sell, I have to add this feature, and then the marketing team has to adjust this flyer. I've now added a series of several dependencies, which is then going to increase the amount of time it's going to take to actually launch that thing to increase the revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, part of the idea here, so regardless of kind of which model you're in, and the ones you highlighted before, you may be in a certain type of tech model, perhaps you're in subscription, for example, traditional services, or you're in e-commerce, you're selling a product. In order to increase the accuracy at which you can forecast things, so i.e., well, I'm going to do this piece of work because I think it's going to have lots of impact, whether that's true or not is to be determined. But if you want to get better at making those judgment calls in advance, one of the core skills that you need to build is a greater degree of understanding of your actual underlying business model. And when I say that, effectively, a way of framing that will be, well, what are the core drivers for results here? And how well or what degree of detail can I add to understand this better? And the reason I say this is because when you're making assumptions about impact, ultimately what you're doing is you're saying, well, if this is kind of the funnel or the core drivers of my business, I'm assuming one or more of these is going to improve. So you don't just go, I'm going to do initiative XYZ or build new feature XYZ because it's just going to be gains, bro. Like we're doing it because it's saying, well, that feature is going to increase engagement or retention, or actually, this change to the PDP, like the product display page and an e-com website, that's going to improve conversion rate. Or, this new bundle we're going to test is going to increase AOV. Or if we, slightly reposition our service, we can charge a higher price. So I think the whole idea of prioritization is effectively, in some regards, dependent on your judgment calls, and your judgment calls in many regards, not exclusively, but in large part is based on your capacity to intimately understand your business model. And this is kind of where a lot of people, unfortunately, fall down because they lack curiosity or industriousness in the sense that they go, and I would like to use e-commerce as an example because it's very well understood, or subscription businesses. So subscription, they'll go, well, we have X amount of members. So long as we can add more members than we lose, we make more money.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, that's missing so much detail. And also it's potentially untrue, right? And so you can say, well, hold on. Well, what frequencies do our customers pay out? What's the varying kind of price across the SKU mix, if you will? Part of the core issue here is that people have low fidelity and low understanding of their business model. In subscription, people will say, well, if we have this many members, as long as we add more than we lose, we're growing, we're going to make more money. And that's not always necessarily true. And so as you kind of break this down, you can go, well, we have different subscription options. So we bill at different points. Monthly, quarterly, biannually, annually. They all have different prices. The longer the tenure, the lower the price.
Yes.
So if the blend of that or the mix of that changes, then the average price per user per period changes. Then from an acquisition, from a retention perspective, even layers like retention and churn are subtly different. Cancellation and churn are subtly different. And so the less understanding you have about this, the less understanding you have about your business model, the less quality the decisions you can make for things like impact and certainty because you have low fidelity.
Yeah, right. That's super, super interesting. Just give us 1 second. You're listening to the podcast, and I'm here to tell you to follow it. Come on, let's get stuck back in. He's an interesting dude, eh?
Yeah, when reviewing the impact that they're going to have on your business, right? And so more curiosity and industriousness here to, one, figure out what other layers exist that you're not currently aware of. Two, be curious about exploring them. And then three, finding ways and resourceful ways to add value to those particular drivers in your organization. That's kind of the root cause or the root of prioritization. But because a lot of people don't have that understanding or go to that layer, then they can't actually make good decisions. They're kind of flying blind.
Yes,
they're kind of spraying and praying in some regards.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's like without the correct data points, it's hard to actually know what to prioritize. Because like you, again, back to this point, it's like you think it's going to make the biggest impact, but do you know the answer?
Well, and normally people who are early in their journey and or respectfully perhaps are less successful, they're making a lot of these decisions with low degrees of fidelity. So they'll say, I'm going to build this feature in my app because it's going to increase retention.
Yep.
Well, why? Like what is the core behavior that is going to change in that specific demographic, if not for all of your users, that as a result of that behavioral change is going to reduce churn. So like what's the connectivity between the two? And so like as an example during my time at Sweat, like as we got more sophisticated with this over time, several really core insights come to mind. One of them was that we knew we had two fundamental problems in the business to solve. One was the 0 to 1 problem, and the other one was the 1 to 5 problem. So 0 to 1 was, can I get you to do a workout in 7 days?
Yes.
Because that materially increases the likelihood that you will convert to a pay member. And then number two, if I can get you to do 5 workouts in 30 days or less, we've got you. We've got you for a really long time.
Yes.
But then no matter how hard we try there, we realize over time, well, actually a huge degree of the underlying cause for that happening was just who you were.
Yeah.
So there's product facing things. What experiences can we create to get you to express that behavior? And then there's kind of marketing, driven assumptions. So, okay, well, how do we become more clever to find a higher percentage of these people that are going to do these things as a gross percentage of our total user base?
Yes. So spending the time to find the right user who is going to, is like fundamentally that's ingrained in them. So you're going upstream to solve that. When they come through the funnel, they're not going to drop off like a sieve because you've at least got the right person.
And so the whole thing here is if you don't have a comprehensive understanding of what's going on in your business, which typically it takes time, like you can't kind of go from 0 to hero overnight. That takes time. But at a fundamental level, if you are making prioritization decisions and you're not at least even like curious or asking those questions, then you're effectively flying blind. And you're like all things, lots of people might win at the pokies from time to time. But if you want to win repeatedly, right, then you have to have some method for doing so. And this is kind of part of that core method that should exist, in my opinion.
Love it. Now, I had... the concept for me in business was just test and measure. So whatever 100%. I'm going to do is I'm going to do a test, and therefore I'm going to make a decision. I can do it really quickly. But what is the measurement that I can say that was a success or not? And so I got really like specific with that in the early days. And it was like when I'm doing a sales call, I'm going to try a new script that I've got somewhere from some book or something. I'm going to test it several times back to back. I'm going to record it. And my measurement was, of course, yes, the customer is going to close down, but that's almost like a little bit too far down the track. And that's not like a real measurement of like that specific conversation because they maybe we're never going to buy. So my measurements were things like, what was their inflection of their voice? What was the change in nuance and tone? And did they go all of a sudden from like really closed to becoming really open? And so the question I have for you is, you mentioned there around the curiosity piece. Share with me like, and let's get specific, is like, how can that person listening today go, what are pieces and elements of curiosity they can kind of bake in?
Well, in a simple sense, it's this idea of, ask better questions, get better answers, right? And also try to, wherever possible, try to avoid making assumptions. And what I mean by that is, so, and very specific with the language here. So, I assume this is going to happen. An alternate way of phrasing that would be, well, we've observed that under these circumstances, this is more likely, to happen. And this is I believe that language is a really big and important variable, even when like assessing the competency of founders or management individuals. I'm like, how do they talk and communicate, what language do they use?
I now want to be asked, what's your assessment of me?
You're being assessed. Yeah.
We'll come back.
So with this idea of kind of test, measure, learn, like we had this idea from an experimentation design perspective that you kind of had to be able to reasonably convince people that it was likely to happen before that we would kind of go and invest in that. But I think the measurement idea kind of still falls into that underlying idea of like how well do you kind of understand the business model?
Yes.
How curious are you about trying to understand those things? And so use another organization, so another company I founded, one of the core challenges there was they'd be trying to sell a product, like a tech product, to a large audience, a huge portion of which the audience were like, well, I don't need you. I have no underlying need for you. Anyway, so we've sold over 1,200 of these now to people who didn't need, the product, right? And it makes us, sort of 10 to 20,000 a year per person, right? And so when looking at that, one type of founder or individual will go, well, I've just been rejected 100 out of 100 phone calls. Another person might go, well, why am I being rejected? Specifically to your point, like what specific kind of value propositions do they disagree with? And what for those value propositions, what are the specific objections that they have? And then based on those objections, well, what specific handling, like objection handling tools am I going to kind of try to put into place to, break through that? And so this is all, there's nothing complicated here. This is all very basic, very basic line of questioning. Why, how, when, where, who, there's no kind of complex line of questioning here, but it's actually just, it's making that almost habitual. And this idea, I commonly say to management teams, I'm like, you should never accept defeat, ever. And even if you're winning, that's still defeat. And you should try to find a way to beat that winning. Like it's a mindset game, right? Yeah. So if you're aiming for 10, if you get 8, you can't accept that. You have to try to find a way to get 8. You want to understand how to bridge the gap. If you aim to get 10 and you get 10, well, now can you get 12? And it's like, and some people will look at that as like a negative loop or it's emotional or whatever, like emotionally confronting or whatever that may be. But I'm like, but this is actually just, in my opinion, one of the innate characteristics of from like very successful founders or even management individuals. The ones who are independent problem solvers, very proactive. Don't have victim mindset, are very industrious. Very open, very adaptable. These are normally the people or founders that are more successful than others because they either A, won't take no for an answer, or B, won't take loss for the end. For them, that's just another speed hump. It's just another beginning, if you will.
And to kind of close that loop, the reason that mindset is super critical and important is because just like there isn't a perfect 10 out there in the world, there isn't a perfect 10 in business because the capitalist society allows us to continue to grow and scale. And you have to kind of embed that mindset from the get-go. It's not like when I get to X, then all of a sudden I'll change my ways and I'll become into like, I'll strive to be better. It's an infinite game.
100%.
And so therefore you'll never get there. So you have to continually to go and repeat and repeat and repeat. And like we talked offline, it's like, the founder that does get from 1 to 10 million and then from 10 to 100 and 100 to a billion, there are different characteristics for that person to remain at the helm of that company. You look at someone like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, and it's like how they've managed to go from being the right person when it was in the garage to now still be the right person when they're multi-trillion-dollar companies. Yeah,
that's the most impressive thing about them as individuals. It's not raw intelligence, or anything like that. It's actually their capacity to keep up with growth. And also it's a multi-dimensional growth. It's not just like Zook is not just good at programming. He understands a lot more than just programming. Elon Musk didn't just have a once-off idea to build something and then you kind of scale it further with PayPal. It's like the guy's done it across multiple industries simultaneously. He's clearly an incredibly industrious founder. And I think even for people there at that level, but potentially more so maybe, for the people that are earlier on in the journey, there's a really interesting tension that goes on between, belief and faith. So in other words, just to like define, so, belief is, confidence that something will occur based on historical evidence, right? Faith is confidence that something that will occur regardless of evidence existing or not, right? And so, for 100% of people that start organizations for the first time, right, there is no evidence available that they can do this. So it's effectively fully faith-driven, right? But then a lot of the external world would look at founders and go, well, once you've reached a certain point of success, well, that's just all, it's belief-driven, it's evidence-driven. You've gotten this far. so clearly you can get over here, but that's not actually true,
Yeah.
right? So there's a constant kind of ebbing and flowing between the balance of kind of self-belief or faith over time, and part of that, I guess, underlying certainty. So i.e. like, I have faith that I'll figure it out, even if I've never been here before. I have faith that I will figure it out, right? That underlying belief or mindset in some regards is incredibly powerful because it's what drives you to solve the problem as opposed to fall victim to the problem.
The difference between there lies the opportunity, or I just can't do it. It's too much, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, yeah. And I love this idea in all contexts of life, of course, especially business, when I want to get to this certain point, I got here. And some people within a certain mindset will say, well, that's kind of the end game. Whereas I'll say, I wanted to get here and now I'm here. I'm like, well, how far, how much further can I go? How much closer to perfection, how much bigger, how much more efficient, how much better, how much easier, doesn't matter what it is. It's constantly striving, for that. And that hasn't slowed down even for me in my journey now. Like I feel like I'm learning more than ever because I actually think I've gotten better at asking questions and better at being kind of fact driven, as opposed to emotionally driven.
Love it. So let's so kind of rounding out this idea around prioritization. I want to talk about the allocation of the founder's time.
Sure.
And so let me kind of jam with this one to start. What I think is really interesting is, and this is not necessarily, it's day one, you open the doors. It's kind of like, hey, your business is growing. You're now looking for investment of capital. You have a little bit of extra cash flow going. You can go to the next stage. Yes, we can add people to the seats. But now we have to look at how do we allocate our time as a founder to make sure we get the best output.
Yep.
And so how I thought about this for myself and how I help other businesses think about it is, there's this awful mindset, which I believe keeps a lot of businesses really small.
Yep.
If you want something done right, do it yourself.
Yeah.
And it couldn't be further from the reality because yes, there are certain things in you that if you want it done right, yes, you will do it because you are the best at that task.
Yep.
And then the reality of a founder is you're doing a lot of shit that doesn't make sense that you're doing it.
Yep.
So for example, I've recently had a conversation with someone where I said to them, what I want you to do is currently your business, that person was within like a $1 to $3 million range. I said, currently your business, 100% of it comes from you doing social media. And that's your entire inbound. I want you to look at your time, break it down into a percentage of the top 5 tasks.
Yep.
And so what they did is they went, 25% of my time is spent on creating social content.
Yep.
35% of my time is done on accounting, invoicing, so on and so forth. And so the way I got her to think about it was, this many million, you're spending 20 hours a week. And so take the total number of earnings divided by the hours per week.
Yep.
That is your hourly rate that you can create for the business.
Yeah, and if you're going to outcharge this, can you get somebody else to do that thing for less price? Yeah, it's a really interesting idea.
And then the last overlay there is but then they're doing a task which is accounting or invoicing. The reality is you're not the best at that. You could be doing that, get that done for $40, and now you have the ability to increase your revenue, increase your sales. And so that from a
It's a sliding
prioritization,
scale.
the opportunity is there. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. In a simple sense, they're not going to do it the best, so that means it can be done better. And they're also not the cheapest, which means it can be done cheaper. So there's a two-dimensional win here. One, it's way cheaper. 2, it'll probably happen better. There's arguably a third arm as well, which is obviously kind of the opportunity cost of that person not doing other things. I think if you had to illustrate the idea or the concept in a graph, you could probably look at it across 2 dimensions and say, well, a founder starts by doing everything. And then progressively moves closer to doing nothing. And that might sound strange, but let's just bear with me. So there's the everything to nothing spectrum, and then there's the low to high value spectrum. And what arguably should happen over time is you should, as you move from doing everything closer to nothing, the average value from tasks that you do should move from low to high.
Yes.
Right? And so now that's obviously just a concept, like an abstract idea, but that should be ultimately the goal. And what I mean by that is that as a founder, you should be working towards doing the least amount of things, making the least amount of decisions, but exclusively focusing on the ones that are going to have the absolute maximum amount of value. Now, over time, the transition that happens there is this kind of repeated cycle of abandonment, if you will, or delegation. As some people like that word, not necessarily the biggest fan of, right? But so over time, ideally, they're progressively parting ways with things that are lower than the average value that they can drive, for the particular period of time that they have. And so, one of the exercises I've often got people to do is, on a kind of A4 piece of paper or, kind of printed or digital, draw a line down the middle, have 2 columns. The left column is, things I currently do that I do better than anyone else that I know.
Yeah.
Things I currently do that it's probably reasonable people can do as good or better than me.
Yes.
And that's just the initial exercise. And I'm literally talking like add 50 or 60 items.
Yeah, I love
if you can. And then similar to what you've said, I'm like, well, the problem solving thing here is I'm like, okay, well, for everything that you don't do best, let's move on. Offshore, employ, contract, whatever it may be. Then reallocate, your kind of time elsewhere. And then for the things that you do, the absolute best that nobody else can do, take like the top 3 or 4, remove everything else and put it on the other column.
Yes.
Because it's probably not true.
Yes.
And the one of the hidden insights there probably is actually that if you are a first-time founder, everything that you are doing is new to you.
Yeah.
But it's not new to the world. Everything is unique to you, but it's not unique to the rest of the world. And one of the pitfalls that massively slows down people is they go, oh, we're a really unique business, really unique product, a really unique community, really unique marketing. I was like, well, do you use organic social? Yep. Paid social? Yep. Cool. Then you are within the constraints of what currently exists. Maybe you have a slightly tweaked version of it, but you are effectively doing what everyone else does. Yeah. Okay. And it's like, well, your product's like, did you engineer it from scratch or create it from scratch and there's effectively no one else that's doing anything that you're doing? No. Well, then it's not unique. It's just an iteration of, right? Like it's not fully innovative, right? And so if those things are kind of true, that's a really important emotional acceptance point for founders as far as their work prioritization goes and where they kind of allocate their time. Because if they are under the illusion that a lot of what they do or all of what they do is unique, then they can never ever clear that left column.
Yes, that's good.
Right. And so this is a very, I think we spoke about this, last time we caught up. This is an emotional problem to solve, not an intellectual problem to solve, because it's emotion that drives, the attachment to being unique or individual or special. When objectively, there's not actually a lot of like truly new stuff. And when you do see truly new stuff, so when I said that, I mean like innovation in business model, or innovation in technology. Well, what do you see? AI, bang, huge. That's truly new stuff or better versions of, innovations in business model, your Uber versus taxis, huge, so true innovation and truly unique things typically end up being huge. So for the rest of us, we're playing an iteration game and we're chasing trends or getting ahead of the next curve. Yeah.
It's super interesting. There's my brain just kind of clicked in that moment. Because what you're doing there is kind of going upstream, and there's a like even before you can write it all down, is like there needs to be that mindset click and just
full acceptance,
helping them understand that. Then goes like, okay, cool. Because one of the pieces I really resonate with that is the learning that I heard from the Gymshark CEO, Ben Francis,
founder,
as the business grew, he was like, I'm no longer the best person for the CEO and stood down. And I'm now going to be the chief product. Grew, I'm no longer the right person for that. And then like kept continuously stepping down and then having and that sounds so easy when you chat on a podcast, but like
it's huge maturity though.
The huge maturity, like at 24 to make a decision like that when your business is just crushing.
Insane.
And everybody around you would be like, you're the God's gift to the earth. And you're just like, I'm not the right one. And then like literally 10 years later, it's like, I'm now ready.
Yeah, but this is the point though. Look what he was able to achieve as a result of that. And I commonly ask people, like, what is the price that you pay for being a victim to your fear? Because if you are afraid to accept that that's true, don't expect to have extraordinary results. Right? So you have to have extraordinary honesty and extraordinary integrity and extraordinary courage and work ethic if you want to get extraordinary results. And if you're not willing to do kind of all of those things, then don't expect extraordinary, right? And regardless of whether it's kind of painful, uncomfortable, upsetting, or whatever it may be, it's like there is no care or consideration about how you feel when figuring out what is true. And in that particular case, as far as Ben Francis is concerned, he's, at least for the last 10 or 20 years in that category, objectively, one of the greatest founders.
Yes.
And he was mature enough to acknowledge that he didn't possess all the skill set and that the opportunity was more important than his happiness.
So the last topic I want to cover is around go-to-market strategy.
Yeah.
So thinking about from either different industries or different, I guess, business archetypes, as well as how that changes from early days to we're scaling.
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, when we if we just kind of zoom away from the phrase go to market and to say, well, how do we actually achieve good performance in a general sense? Like conceptually, your go-to-market has worked well, if you have achieved good results, and those results will be good if you have been able to understand and appropriately, execute on product market fit, regardless of the industry. This is kind of a technology term typically, but product market fit, so i.e. have we properly understood the needs and values of our market, and have we been able to appropriately create a product that matches that? That's one thing. But then that only indicates that you've designed an appropriate product for your customers that has no relation to how you got to market, right?
Yes.
But it's still a part of going to market, because if you have really great marketing with a shit product, you're kind of not going very far, right? But once you've kind of identified that had appropriate considerations there, then you kind of have this idea of, well, you have channel market fit. So based on what we are selling, based on the people we've identified we are selling to, what is the best marketing channel or communication channel to use to get access to them that will generate results for a low cost and has some reasonable degree of scale, right? And then once you've identified channel market fit, then you kind of have language market fit, which is, well, okay, based on where I am communicating, who I am communicating to, and the product I'm communicating about, have I identified appropriate language, both kind of visual, verbal, or otherwise, to communicate the core values that we have understood, to this audience in the channel at the right time and the right way, right? And is that basically we're saying right product for the market, right channel to market the product, and right language to maximize channel performance for the market, for the product, if that makes sense.
Perfect sense.
And so, I often, you talk to marketing teams, which are normally constituted by a certain type of personality. And a decent portion of them want to be creative, and that's okay. Yeah. But creativity is kind of like an executional how. It's not a what. And part of the issue is people go, oh, we're going to do this idea over here. I'm like, well, like, are you in the right place at the right time, in the right channel with the right comms?
Super interesting. Let's get specific with that. Contextualize to the audience, like one example of that creative thing, but not think about the how.
Yeah. A lot of people, for example, go like, your out-of-home advertising is a really sick idea, or we could like run a really sick influencer event, whatever it may be for this. And I'm like, okay, but is that like reasonably going to get you the result that you want? So for example, if you're doing out-of-home media, but the majority of your customers are accessible in a higher volume at a substantially lower cost with a substantially lower effort, well, what would be the justification for doing out of home? And I'm not saying that out of home is poo-poo or bad. I'm also just saying, like, contextually, right? That's going to fall much lower down the list in certain industries for certain products for certain customers, right? But because some people, again, emotionally would go, oh, dude, it's gonna be so cool, just like having our logo, like up here, it's gonna be great. It's like you've lost touch with what the goal is, which is results, right? And a result isn't how good you feel about it. The result is how much value you generate commercially, however you're choosing to gauge that at that particular point in time. So when thinking about go to market, and let's just say you're doing a marketing campaign, for a particular a new product launch or whatever that you have coming out, I typically like to get people to kind of write this out. I'm like, write me a brief, right? And this brief should include, in general sense, some context for how we got here. It's like, why are we even doing this, thing? And then if we are doing this thing, well, what are we actually trying to achieve? So three or four kind of headline objectives. If we do achieve those objectives, how would we know? So what measures, like what metrics would we have to determine that? Okay, and if this is what we're trying to achieve, well, what are the things we're going to do? Which realistically is a channel plan, so i.e. what marketing channels we're going to use, right? And then based on those channels, how are we going to position? So what's the positioning that we are using here? Kind of headline messaging. What's the product we're going out with?
And that fits into that
core details, core features.
Language
exactly,
category.
And so you should be able to kind of reasonably go, well, hopefully based on your understanding of the business, well, it's pretty reasonable to expect that if this product is kind of priced this way, positioned this way, we use this core messaging, we put it on these channels and we do it in this way and we execute it somewhat decently, that we're going to get these results, right? And so in my opinion, all you're doing over time is you kind of recycle go-to-market activity. You're recycling that learning. So assuming that the marketing team doesn't have any impact on product decisions. So let's just assume the product is right. So if you're in a go-to-market, kind of marketing team, it's like, well, did you choose the right channels? Did those channels perform? Did the messaging resonate? Did the visuals resonate? Or whatever it is that you're doing. And if you're not kind of assessing it that way, then you're not integrating that like kind of high velocity feedback loop. And a lot of people go like, oh, it's a lot of writing and it's a lot of thinking. I'm like, well, what's worse, losing or being prepared and hoping that you'll win, right? Because part of the issue, especially with marketing teams too, and especially with creative, like very creative marketing teams, is they do sometimes fall into the trap of what will be cool to suit their audience, but not what is practical.
I've definitely been guilty of that several times in my coming up.
But this is a thing, right? Like, because what ultimately people realize over time from a marketing perspective, and people don't like this, but marketing science kind of, I guess it is axiomatic in some regard that you don't need every channel.
Yes.
Most of your results will come from kind of 2 or 3 channels.
Yep.
And so, yes, adding on new channels over time is great for kind of incrementing forward. But so long as you're kind of killing it, and you've got great kind of rigor around your kind of top 2 or top 3 channels. But most people don't get there because they fall into the kind of creative coolness, the creative coolness trend. And so part of this here is, again, it's like that writing things out is meant to hopefully void or at least reduce emotional impact, on that journey. And part of the issue too is that a lot of the creative people, they'll put campaigns out, get great likes and engagement and whatever online, but that's only one aspect of measurement. No amount of likes or engagement is going to fund your next stock order.
And I'll play back to you what I heard there, because I think it's super critical from the audience takeaway is, sometimes when we think about that really specifically, it's like we go creative first rather than like the top of line has to be, it's what are we trying to achieve? And then what is the right creative and language and things that's going to fit into
and
the
even the channel selection, right?
Yes.
Because what channel you're on is going to immediately dictate what creative you can have, both because there's rules and policies. But there's also different formats that kind of are and aren't accepted, and different formats that kind of conventionally do and don't perform better, right? So even down to like you film in a landscape or portrait, something as simple as that, right? But the creative, I guess, kind of execution still has to be reflective of the kind of rules of reality. That is, certain customers exist in certain places that are accessible, cheaper and more efficiently than other places. And based on that, those customers are going to be more susceptible to this style of kind of positioning or whatever it may be, messaging, if you will. Because even as simply as that, even if you just look at advertising as an individual channel, the people who do that incredibly well, after you've got most of the administrative account settings set up, they're very good at doing creative testing. But a lot of people think that's how do I do a cool viral thing. When the reality actually is you could do the same video with 10 different supers. And when I say superimpose text in the video, and all you're doing is saying, well, does different messaging kind of relate better to certain audiences, and then based off that learning, then go away and create new visual representation of that. Then you iterate and test, right? So that's a kind of micro version, if you will, of kind of multi-channel campaigning. That's a micro example.
Love it. And I think this is the reason for the Founders Lab, Toby, is like, as we talk, it becomes very clear that we've done a number of these things. And I'll talk from my perspective. I've made these errors along the way because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So like when you said the creative first piece thing is like I would literally go to the team like I've got this amazing idea. We're going to do this funny video, and then you retrospectively plug it back into something, and only through like the failures you then kind of create these little different frameworks, and then what I want to try and do here is like help people go showcase what we've learned, and then hopefully compress the time it takes to be a success in a business.
Yep.
Mate, that's perfect. Let's get stuck into the next one.
Keen.